Brewster is absent. Commissioner Barwick. Commissioner Mabry.
Here.
Commissioner Holder.
Here.
Commissioner Zelps.
Here.
Commissioner Dillingham.
Here.
Commissioner Kane.
Morning.
Commissioner Gaddis.
Here. And Russ Horton will lead us in the invocation and followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for a beautiful day. Gathered together, we're humbled to be reminded of the role that we play in the management of your creation and your guidance in our decisions. Safe on the journey home, and above all, we're thankful for your love of eternal life with you because of the love of your Son, Jesus.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
JD, would you introduce our guests?
Well, I would be happy to. We have with us this morning Dwayne Elmore from Oklahoma State, Madison Washburn from Oklahoma State, Kira Kaufman from Oklahoma State, all three involved in extensive quail research for all of our benefit. Of course, we have Laura McIver here from Quail Forever, the most regular attendee of all. Jordan Minge from Pheasant Forever, Quail Forever, David Lindsay from Pocasset, Raymond Rice from Belma, Bill Long from Midwest City, and Rick Grunman, of course, representing the foundation. That's it.
All right. And we have some awards. An award.
Okay, so this morning we are celebrating, let me find it, excuse me, Andrea Cruz for, maybe I can talk and look for it at the same time. Andrea Cruz for her 25 years of service to the department. She began in November of 1996 as a human dimensions specialist. She then became a responsive management specialist, human dimensions specialist, again a senior specialist in 2007, and then became the federal aid coordinator in 2013, where she has been a great steady hand at the wheel, keeping us out of trouble and hot water when it comes to all the federal grant money that we get in. She is a workhorse. She puts the D in detail and the A in type A, I would say, too, but that's a good thing. Works tirelessly to keep millions of sport fish and PR dollars in the bank. We definitely, and I can attest, being really involved at the national level at AFWA, being a state director member on the Joint Task Force for federal funding, that we have one of the best, if not the best, federal aid departments in the land. And it's all thanks to Andrea. She enjoys traveling with her husband, Joe, daughter Autumn, and sons Justin and Asher. She recently discovered she has lived too many years without a pontoon boat and loves her new lake life with her new pontoon boat as well. So today we celebrate Andrea Cruz for 25 years of service to the department.
Thank you. It's been great. I've really enjoyed working here. I cannot believe it's been 25 years. And the next 25, right? Thank you.
You're not old
Thank
enough to
you.
have been here 25 years.
Okay, so we mentioned it before. She's not going to get to stay seated for too long. The department, as a result of feedback we got through the strategic planning process, there were some employees, in fact, about maybe a little over a third of our employees that really didn't qualify for any of the Game Warden of the Year, Biologist of the Year, Technician of the Year, Fisheries Professional of the Year awards. And so there was a desire to set up an award program for all of our employees that don't otherwise qualify for those other awards that are out there. And so We had a team get together representing multiple divisions within the agency, and they stood up a new Spirit of ODWC award. And so I mentioned the types of employees that qualify for that, and applications were accepted, nominations were accepted for the award program, and employees were evaluated based on the nominees' customer service orientation, teamwork, problem-solving initiative, and leadership skills. And I'm pleased to announce that the inaugural award of Spirit of ODWC Award goes once again to Andrea Cruz, and I'll let you know why before you get up here. Customer service. Her role as FA coordinator is the epitome of customer service. Her service to all divisions and sections within ODWC, Fish and Wildlife Service, universities, municipalities, and private entities is unparalleled. She is courteous, professional, and highly respected in her field, which is a result of her total commitment to the agency and customer service. She, teamwork-wise, is one of the hardest working, most dedicated employees that has ever worked for ODWC. The entire federal aid section is 100% teamwork, not only within the shop, but everything else she does revolves around teamwork. Words can't describe the level of teamwork it takes to manage a 42% increase in the federal apportionment we have experienced since she became federal aid coordinator. And so a lot more work to do and not a lot more employees to help her do it. You would kill me if I didn't get that little stab in, right? Problem-solving initiative. Her experience, attention to detail, and love for what she does allows her to solve most issues before they become huge problems. When problems appear to be looming, she always consults with the divisions, the CFO, the AD, and the director to find workable solutions. On the leadership side, she is extremely self-disciplined and dedicated to ODWC. She gets an A+ for leadership and adaptability. She works diligently and faithfully behind the scenes, doesn't have high-profile programs to be recognized for, but does fulfill a critical role for us at ODWC, as well as our conservation partners, universities, NGOs, and every one of our constituents. And that is true. You've probably not seen many presentations from Andrea herself, but almost every presentation you've seen is a result of her work in the federal aid department and making sure that we get that federal funding to go towards all of those critical projects that everybody else comes and presents to the commission for you to know about. So without further ado, we present the inaugural Spirit of ODWC Award to Andrea, and we do have a fancy custom-made trophy in the making. It's just not quite ready yet. We'll blame it on COVID supply chain issues, but there it is.
Congratulations, Andrea, and thank you. Oh, yeah, it's looking good today.
Anything else to say?
Not because of me.
There's a lot of hardworking employees. It's really an honor because there are a lot of people at ODWC who are super passionate about what they do, and there's a lot of hardworking people. So to be recognized like this is an honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, next is the consideration to vote, approve, amend, or reject, or take other action in the minutes of the January 3rd meeting. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Barwick? Commissioner Mabry? Commissioner Holder? Commissioner Zelps? Commissioner Dillingham? Commissioner Kane? Commissioner Gaddis?
Aye. And the director's report from JD.
Thank you very much. I see Corey. I can't tell if she's hiding behind Ken but today is opening day of the legislative session, so things are starting to crank up, and so we'll first get a update from Corey on what's happening across the street.
Good morning. So you should all have in your packet the first of the legislative trackers for the year. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because there's 49 bills, but I will point out that this is the second session of the 58th legislature, so all the bills that didn't die last session come back this session, so you'll see a lot of the same stuff from last year. We did file 2 new bills for our license modernization. They're essentially identical bills, one in the Senate and one in the House. So we have Senate Bill 1709 and House Bill 4086 for those, and I'm happy to provide more information on those if you want to see the language, or I have a summary of the bills prepared, but those are going to be our priority for the session, and really the main ones that we want to get through the legislature. You can see, I think on your tracking list, that they did start in the Senate to pre-assign bills to committees, and so a few of them, of course, going to Ag and Wildlife Committee on the Senate, and the House, I think, is starting to work on that this week. And there are already committee meetings starting tomorrow, so it's going to be a busy week. We have a couple on here that I think one already has a hearing on Wednesday that caps total public land to 10% for all state agencies, federal agencies. So that one's kicking it off strong this week. So other than that, we're probably going to try to do a lunch or a breakfast with the Game Warden Association probably in the coming weeks, specifically to talk a little bit more probably about our license bill and anything else that legislators are maybe interested in, and invite you all if you are interested in coming to that. And then I don't think I have anything else to add. So today's the day, and I believe noon is when the governor does his kickoff with the State of the State, and they should be live streaming that if you don't want to actually go to the Capitol and listen. So, any questions?
Any questions for Corey? More to come on that front
Yes.
then. Stay tuned.
Thanks.
Thanks, Corey.
Thank you, Corey.
You also have a report in your packets from Brittany Preston on what is happening at the federal level. Lots of focus on budget and debt ceiling and continuing resolutions to keep the government in operation. The president's Build Back Better plan, which is still in limbo with the fiscal price tag attached to that. Some positive news on the Recovering America's Wildlife Act side of things, though. We did see markup and passage of the Recovering America's Wildlife Act out of House Natural Resources Committee, and now it appears on the Senate side, Environment and Public Works, that they're shaping up to maybe have a committee markup on the bill within the next couple of months. It appears from all intents and purposes that the EPW staff really kind of has this bill front and center and is really the number one priority that they're working on right now in Environment and Public Works Committee. So for the first time ever, we might actually see a floor vote on recovering, which, as you will recall, would send, based on a formula, how to allocate that federal funding, we might see 16 to 18 million more dollars come to Oklahoma to do work on sensitive, threatened species in effort to keep them off the endangered species list. And so it'll be the first time ever. In fact, since the 30s when Pittman Robertson passed and the 50s when Dingle Johnson passed to set up the Sport Fish Restoration Fund, this would be the biggest fish and wildlife restoration funding to come along in a long time. And of course, the way it's worded right now, it would be ongoing permanent funding to the states, so states could really ramp up and do some good work to work on things like lesser prairie chicken in northwest Oklahoma, and monarch butterflies and those sorts of things. Try to keep those species off the list. So stay tuned for that. And the only other thing that I'll report is we did have some positive movement on the infrastructure funding bill that Congress passed, and money went to go towards infrastructure improvements across the country. We did learn last week that our efforts at the national level, kind of meeting with and pounding away with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we did get a movement out of the Fish and Wildlife Service in Washington, D.C. to instruct their regions to look at some of our and other states' infrastructure priority lists for potential funding through that Infrastructure Act. I know Commissioner Dillingham, you had asked about that previously, if we'd been successful, and we haven't yet, but now looks like we have some movement on that front, so maybe we can, knock on wood, we'll see if we can get some of that money to go towards fish hatchery update needs, Hackberry Flat, pipeline, a number of other things that are on the list, roads for our WMAs was a big one on the list. Several things like that, so stay tuned. Yeah, positive development there. In my state report, let me get over to that. We did participate in a successful virtual meeting of the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. Had their midwinter meeting kind of the week or two before we headed to Scottsdale, Arizona. It was decided we were going to have to cancel everything and go virtual, just given all kinds of complications with the host hotel mostly. But kudos to staff for pulling off the first ever and very notable. People are still commenting about it. Friday evening reception where several of us were scattered around town at various locations and live streaming for the folks that tuned in for the reception that was going to be in person to try to get folks interested in coming to Oklahoma City this summer, but instead we did it all virtually and ended up at the Skydance Brewing Company at the very end of the reception with the crowd to cheers all of our Western Association partners. So thanks to everybody that helped pull that off. Opening day of session today, of course, you'll see on the calendar there, we've got some upcoming archery in the schools, shooting competitions coming up on the calendar in the next few weeks. We do intend to go ahead and have Rack Madness here on March 1st. We suspect it will be a little less mad than it has before. We're not going to work really hard to pack everybody in the doors. But if people do want to come and get racks officially scored, we will have the resources here to do it. Spring directors meeting for SEFWA is coming up in March 9th through 10th, as is the North American Wildlife Conference. That is really kind of the biggest wildlife conference of the year. Is so far still going to be partly virtual and then partly in person the week of March 14th. You will see lots of stuff going on in Human Dimensions, a women and hunting survey that closed on January 2nd. I know Betsy, Corey are working on the write-up of that, and so we'll have some interesting results from that, looking at how we can improve attracting, recruiting, retaining women into hunting in particular. Game harvest survey is up and running, data collection for that annual survey will be going on through Friday. Lots of activity in the administration division, you can see there. All the work happening, continuing to stock trout in fisheries. Manning pump station project is about to wind up, and they're starting work on phase 2 for the water holding reservoir at Manning. Lots of ground maintenance and construction work, shop buildings, engineering plans, so forth going on. Of note, we did finalize a cooperative agreement with ODOT to gain an additional fishing access place on the Eldon Bridge over the Barren Fork east of Tahlequah. So that work was kind of started last year and in earnest, and we hope to add a lot more fishing access points to our portfolio, if you will, as we work with ODOT on their new bridge crossing projects across the state. So lots of mowing and maintenance and ongoing stuff going on in fisheries, creel surveys and paddlefish surveys, and lots going on. It doesn't stop during the winter months for sure. In C&E division, for the second year in a row, we received a competitive Vamos a Pescar grant. We'll be working again with OKC Latina and the Scissortail Park. We had some very successful fishing days at Scissortail Park last year, getting folks in the Hispanic community out, in most cases, fishing for their very first time, just because we rolled up and had our mobile catch trailer that we got from RBFF, stocked full of rods and reels, and you roll up when people are there for a festival, and turns out they get really interested in grabbing a rod and reel for the first time. And I think our staff figured out we were very much overwhelmed and need to have more staff on site next time we do that. But a second round of grants for that highly successful effort coming our way, so great job there. We also worked on developing some short videos for commercials and so forth to be able to use for marketing, including features of C&E Secretary Heather Del Moral, who was out there at the coffee stand earlier, and Game Warden Ben Half. So stay tuned for those to go out on our media channels more and more. Just to brag a little bit too on social media, you may recall that we hired a first time ever coordinator to just totally focus on our social media channels for the department. That hire was made last year, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it hadn't been that long. Sarah Sutherland. And so now every time I see somebody from outside the department, they say, who do you have running your social media right now? Because they're killing it. And I'm like, I'm not telling you because you're going to try to poach them. But she ran a couple of weeks ago in particular, a Twitter post of cuddly little mountain lion and talking about not to let them indoors no matter how cold it is. And it just went crazy. It was number 6 post in the world for an hour on that Sunday after it posted. And we had Ryan Reynolds retweeting it and all kinds of stuff. So every once in a while, she'll pop out a kind of off-the-wall social media post that people might, in our line of work, might look at and go, what does that have to do with anything that we do at Department of Wildlife? But it does gain a lot more followers on our social media channel, so then she can turn around and teach them something that we want to teach or educate people on that social media channel. So kudos to her. She also used that to leverage a lot more followers on our new TikTok channel out there. So that one's even more off the wall than all the rest of them, but lots of fun. Let me just try to hit the highlights going through here. Kudos to Gina Donnell for getting a lot more folks signing up for our e-newsletters as well, and promoting the tax checkoff for wildlife diversity program. So if you got a little refund coming, don't forget our wildlife diversity program tax checkoff. Pronghorn surveys ought to be wrapping up probably this week, so we'll have some more data on what the pronghorn population looks like up in the Panhandle. Plus, we've got some research getting ready to kick off, if it hadn't kicked off, at Oklahoma State on looking at that population as well. Thanks to Commissioner Dillingham for helping set up a meeting between staff and one of his county commissioners, talk about some needed road work at Drummond Flats, and he at least got us in the door, and we'll see where it goes from there. But hopefully that will result in some progress on some badly needed road repairs up there. Lots of folks preparing for upcoming grazing season and getting ready for those grazing leases to be bid out in the next few weeks, and preparing for burning season. In fact, burning already where we can, where we're not under burn bans due to the drought. So we always wish we could do more burns, but sometimes conditions don't allow it. Late winter habitat management, brush control, cedar cutting, sunflower production for dove fields, all that, or disking to prepare for that. Of course, we wouldn't be planting sunflowers yet, but lots of routine maintenance and hay leasing, getting prepared for. Staff, I know there's interest among the commission on WMA plans. Staff continues to do the data entry work for the dashboard component of our WMA plans. We'll probably, Bill, want to get an update to the commissioners soon on that particular project, maybe a PowerPoint or something at an upcoming meeting, but lots of good work going on there that will enable us to essentially have digitized wildlife management area plans that anybody can parachute in to the WMA and see what's been done and what's up next and what needs to be prioritized for work and how many more resources we need to devote to that effort. So looking forward to some great things there. 234 elk harvested on the Wichita Refuge this year, so through those controlled hunts, those continue to be more and more successful every year. Finished the Sandy Sanders acquisition of 6,200 adjacent acres that you all approved a while back. So that has been finalized. Law Enforcement Division, District 4 had a special emphasis on the Blue River public fishing and hunting area. I know there's always a lot of interest by local and resident anglers in particular about the place getting run over with trout fishermen this time of year. Wardens checked 225 anglers, issued 25 citations, and had a very successful day on January 22nd, reminded folks of the law and regulations there. Congrats to Game Warden Emily Long for her promotion to our new Special Wildlife Investigator position. That is a sort of a joint position we'll share with U.S. Fish and Wildlife that will focus on larger multi-state investigations with commercial ties to our natural resources. And you can see there the closeout for law enforcement of 2021, all the miles driven and contacts made, and in addition to citations and warnings written, they lots of hours involved in hunter ed, writing articles and doing other programs for the department besides hunter education. So with that, and before I turn it over to Rick Grumman for an update from the foundation, I might just see if you have any questions for me.
JD, when I saw in your report that the fishery project at J.A. Manning is close to completion. What does close mean? That's kind of a relative term. That thing has been kind of dragging on for way too long. Every time I go by there, it doesn't look like there's any progress.
Yeah, well, we've actually had lots of issues with the contractor at that site, and we had to get, OMES involved and do site visits and get some really strict contract enforcement measures in place to try to get that done. So it is my understanding we finally got progress on the pump station project, which is the phase that we're in now. And you'll also recall for this and Durant and others, we had to break these projects into different phases just because of the money situation. And so, Ken, do you know how close we are on the pump station project?
Okay. Will we be able to pump at that point in time? Okay.
Will we be able to pump before we have the phase 2 reservoir project done? Okay. Storing and recycling.
Right, good. Yeah. Okay. JD, could you, or Ken, either one, just let me know whenever y'all are gonna turn it on?
Yes, we can do that.
Be a big day for me. I mean, I've been out there at times and it's like, what's going on?
Yeah.
It didn't look like much of anything.
It was molasses.
Couple guys with a shovel, and I thought we're not gonna make much progress on this.
Well, you're lucky to see a guy with shovel out there. At one point, they were just like non-existent on the
Did you have
side.
to change subs?
Did we change subs? No. We got close. We were very, very close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
We finally got their attention though.
we've learned our lesson about that contractor. That was our problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Be nice to have some water at the hatchery. And we do have water. Don't want to give anybody the impression
No.
that it's totally dry and not working, but it will be immensely better to have this pump station working.
Very good.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions for me?
Got one?
Yeah.
Just curious, the 234 elk that were harvested, any idea of the bull-cow ratio?
I don't know, but we can get that to you all.
Curious.
Yeah. We can get that. Because those controlled hunts, or you actually draw a bull versus cow tag.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
Well, long as we're mentioning that, the foundation had a cow elk drawing, went very successful. We had a first-time hunter ever. She was a school teacher out of Tulsa,
Yay.
who won a rifle in a raffle a week before she entered ours.
oh, wow.
And it was like a hands-on project, but it was successful. And,
She did harvest an elk.
We
yeah.
need to modify if we do it again next year, the advertisement that the hunter's responsible for field dressing and removing the elk. I was out of town, my wife was out of town, but my son stepped up and we got everything done, but
Well, thank you for that.
it was quite an adventure.
Despite everything, it was successful,
Now,
right?
where exactly do you shoot this cow? You know? One shot, you got him though.
All right, good.
Any more questions or discussion?
And Rick, you got an update on the foundation?
Chair Gaddis, Commissioners, good morning. I've put these orange brochures in front of you. It's a background piece on the foundation, why we need a foundation to support the department's mission and ways for people to get engaged, and it's part of our grant writing project that is ongoing and successfully moving forward. I wanted to give you guys a stack, so if you interact with somebody and they say, what can I do to help the commission, fish, game, wildlife conservation, here's something. Sometimes pictures are worth 1,000 words or more, and it gives contact information and context. So if you need any information additional, please don't hesitate to reach out on that. And there's more where these came from, and we can print more if you need them. Also want to follow up and have good news that the Oklahoma Wildlife Conservation Foundation Hall of Fame that occurred this past October was a quite successful event, and we have scheduled our second event, and it will be, the Hall of Fame event will be Thursday, October 6th. We're going to try a different evening and see what the feedback is as we continue to grow and determine what works best for the state, but it'll be at the Omni Hotel again, and Oklahoma City's own Larry Nichols, it will be our honoree. So we will be having hold the date, save the date cards will be coming out in the next month and a half or so, and if you have any questions on that, please don't hesitate to reach out. Anybody that you would like to ensure is invited, please don't hesitate to either send me the information, or I'm sure Rhonda would be happy to forward it to me with any names and addresses that we can, that you'd like to be included. Any questions or anything that I can provide feedback on, happy to do so.
For those that are not aware, do you want to repeat how much was raised from that gala? Do you have that number?
I don't have the number but we raised over $450,000 for a first-time event and had roughly 370 people attend. Thanks to a lot of people in this room for your support and others. To have a first-time event in the middle of COVID, to raise that much money and to have that much attendance is a testament to the work that you guys and the staff at the department have put forward and the passion that the state of Oklahoma has for conserving and preserving our wildlife and sporting heritage.
And was that revenue ticket sales, auction items, donations? Is it all of the above? Or
all of the above. The auction was quite successful, but the anchor tenant were the sponsors, the table sponsors for the event, honoring John Grondike. Mr. Nichols was selected for his work with the Nature Conservancy and many other areas in raising untold millions of dollars to protect, conserve, and preserve wildlife in Oklahoma. So we're appreciative and thankful to have him as our next honoree, and any questions or thoughts about that, we'll already be considering who will be the next one. It's an ongoing process, but any feedback, thoughts, ideas you guys have, really look forward and would appreciate the feedback, because that's how we get better.
Rick, I've had the pleasure of working with Mr. Nichols on the Nature Conservancy Board for about 11 years. I think he's been on it for 20-plus years. And he does not just with the Nature Conservancy, but ODWC and other organizations, in addition to all the other civic projects and charitable philanthropy that he's involved in the state and within the area here, does a phenomenal job. And he really, truly is very passionate about conservation. So I applaud you on your choice there, and he'll be a great one.
Thank you, and appreciate your service for the Nature Conservancy as well, and for the state. Thanks for the feedback. Anything else? I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Amanda Stork with the financials.
Good morning. All right, so today I have for you the July 1 through December 31st financial report. In your packet, you'll have the combined balance sheet for all fund types and accounts for December 31st, 2021. Liabilities and fund balance is $496,854,622. Of that, $446,965 is liabilities, compared to last year, $469,636,495. Our combined balance sheets for the trust funds for December 31st, 2021, our expendable trust fund balance is $46,028,655. Our non-expendable trust fund balance is $98,431,148. Our pension trust fund balance is $144,160,944, and our DC trust fund balance is $6,432,644 for a total of $295,053,391, compared to last year $270,238,390. Through December 31st for this fiscal year, our combined statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance for December 31st, our revenue is $31,588,267. Our total expenditures, $35,291,767, for a deficit of $3,703,500. Our total fund balance is $67,145,865, which is 23.59% higher than last year. For the period July 1, 2021 through December 31st for our trust funds, our total operating revenues is $9,381,732. Our operating income is $4,949,302. And our total fund balance for December 31st is $249,024,736. And we have a total of $3,300 for our wildlife contributions, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Amanda?
Yes.
You've answered this for me before, so I apologize for the redundancy, but on the combined statement of revenues and expenditures under miscellaneous revenue, what was the big 2020 item that was in there that we don't have reoccurring this year?
The NERDA funds.
Okay.
Yeah, natural resource damage funding.
Thank you.
And then I also have a license report if you guys want to.
Yep.
Okay, so for to date this morning, our number of total licenses sold is down 12% for January compared to 2021 sales. So we have resident fishing is down 28%, resident hunting is up 1%, resident combo is down 30%, non-resident hunting is up 3%, and non-resident fishing is down 24%. Lifetime licenses are down 13%, so we have a slow start to 2022, but we'll continue monitoring it for changes.
And if we take out if we straight line that with taking out the COVID spike, if you will, for the big bump we had during the heavy part of 2020 and into 21. What, how would that look?
So we had a really big January last year, so it's more level when you take out January last year, but I can get the chart with figures for you if you want to see that afterwards. But the dips and the other license categories are a little bit more concerning, but we did have a monster January last year, so.
It'd be interesting to see either a 3-year or 5-year by each category, kind of on what that trend line looks like.
Okay, Mike, are you hearing that? Just kidding.
Yeah, we
He's probably
can,
listening.
yeah, we can look
On
at that,
you.
because I think last I checked anyway, of course, haven't heard the very latest January numbers, but we were still ahead of pre-COVID numbers, in most categories, so, but yeah, we can pull all that together pretty easily now that we have the Brant system. We've got real-time dashboards that several of us look at every day, every other day, every once in a while.
3 to 5 years, okay.
Yeah, if you would just maybe text or email to all of us, that would be great. That way we can all see it. Okay, any other questions or discussion for Amanda? Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, y'all want to approve the contributions?
We do need to make roll call for.
Second.
Okay, roll call.
Commissioner Barwick? Commissioner Mabry?
Aye.
Commissioner Holder? Commissioner Zelps? Commissioner Dillingham? Commissioner Kane? Commissioner Gaddis?
Aye. All right, next item. You all should have received a packet of information, excuse me, for each rule being proposed by the Wildlife Department that is on today's agenda. The packet included the online comments, written and mailed-in comments, and oral comments made at public hearings. At this time, I'd like to poll the members of the commission to confirm that each member has received the packet of rule information from the department and has had the opportunity to review, consider, and consider the public comments submitted in connection with the proposed rule changes.
Commissioner Barwick?
Yes, I've reviewed all comments.
Commissioner Mabry?
Reviewed all.
Commissioner Holder?
Yes.
Commissioner Zelps?
Yes.
Commissioner Dillingham?
Yes.
Commissioner Kane?
Yes.
Commissioner Gaddis?
Yes. All right. We need consideration to vote, approve, amend, reject, or take other action on the permanent rules. Ken Cunningham will ask you to present.
Good morning, Commissioners. The Fishery Division rule change proposals, if approved, would amend Title 800, Chapter 10, Subchapter 1, and Chapter 5. And I thought I would just go kind of give you a summary of what those are and maybe talk just a little bit about the public comments and then make a recommendation. So the rule change proposals include a modification of the statewide size limit for largemouth and smallmouth bass by removing the current 14-inch minimum length limit and replacing it with a 1/over maximum length limit of 16 inches. In conjunction with that rule proposal, there would be a black bass tournament exemption until weigh-in, after which the fish must be released. So those two rules kind of go hand in hand. The third proposal is a statewide length limit for largemouth and smallmouth bass that would be restored on Lake Murray and waters in the Ouachita Mountain Wildlife Refuge. And actually, if the original proposal on largemouth and smallmouth bass is approved, this proposal would be encapsulated in that proposal, so it really wouldn't be necessary. There's also a lower Mountain Fork River trout area bag limit that will be modified to include only one brown trout over 30 inches, and the downstream section of the trout area will be reestablished as a trophy area. There's a daily bag limit of fork-tailed catfish, modified to 6 fish below Carlton Lake in the Fouche-Méline River to the Roberts Cave State Park boundary, and that's basically just to make that regulation consistent with the regulations we have on all of our department lakes and state park lakes. And then finally, there's a series of housekeeping measures related to aquatic nuisance species, conveyance of information, and that sort of thing. There's a proposal to expand the area in the lower Illinois River for netting shad. And finally, a customer ID labeling requirement for containers used to store live fish in the field. So that pretty much sums up at least the rule change proposals in subchapter 1. You all have read the comments that we received, the public comments. The majority of the comments were related to the proposed change in the 14-inch minimum length limit and the black bass tournament exemption. I don't remember that there being a whole lot of comments on the or a whole lot of comments on our other rule change proposals, but that was the big one. Just based on my evaluation of the comments, there were comments for strongly supporting the change. There were some in opposition. Just if I could summarize those, I guess I would say that it seemed like the opposition was to, the assumption is that we're giving tournament anglers something that we're not giving other anglers, non-tournament anglers. If you look at the proposal, though, we're actually requiring more of tournament anglers than we are of non-tournament anglers. So it was it's fisheries staff's recommendation that we adopt these rules. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Ken, thank you, and thanks to your staff for your good work on this. And I know all the commissioners really appreciate the public's input as well, and the comments. It's helpful to see those and read those and kind of keep a pulse on what the public feels for our sportsmen and women. But one of the comments on the fisheries that stuck out to me that I thought was interesting, it's just a question to you and your staff, but was requiring, or they thought that we should require that any fish caught in waters ought to be released, that are released, ought to be released back into those same waters versus different waters. Is that something that you see as a problem, or where are we at on that?
My guess is that that fish are probably released back into the water where the tournament occurs. So I don't know that there's a big issue with fish being moved around from water body to water body.
I'd never heard of that being an issue either, but it kind of struck me that was a perception of a problem, that they're being caught in one area and then maybe released in a different body of water. And so I didn't know whether that was something that you all really had an eye on.
So one of the nice things about this tournament exemption program that we're going to start is that we can actually put that in the permit if we want, if we feel like that's a problem. There's a lot that we can do with that tournament exemption process that we can't do now, and so we're really excited about that part of it.
Yeah, and I might just add, the biggest benefit too is a lot more data coming into the department that we can use, that we have it available to us that we didn't have before, in terms of those very questions. Is that a legitimate problem? Is it just a perceived problem? Either way, we'll have some data to back that up. I mean, one of the fields we could put on the reporting form is where the fish was released, and see if it was caught and released in different locations, if there's any validity to that. It seemed like in the comments that I read, it was particularly prevalent at Kerr Lake, and they were talking about tournaments coming out of Muskogee and Arkansas. And I think, Josh, did you have something else to add on that?
I would say that. I would say, commissioners, that it's basically against the law already. You can't stock public waters. So there's been very few instances in my career where we've had a tournament organization, usually Bass or somebody, that asks for an exemption to that so that they can get the fish back from a long travel they took, and we've made that okay maybe twice. What they're talking about in the river and what came up, that's the river. So you got to understand they can lock through, and this guy's got an idea that he doesn't have any fish left down in the south portion of the river because
lock through and catch them down there and weigh them up at Muskogee. It's an open system. Sure, there's a lock and dam, but those fish travel back and forth. In fact, when we stock fish and want them to stay in the river, we'll stock them 2 or 3 locks up so that they don't get all the way through. So that's more of a perception that they're in a loss of fish down there. Kerr's still, as far as any data shows, really good. In any normal lake, I want you to know though that it's totally, they're not doing that. They're not leaving Grand and putting them somewhere else. It's a riverine type deal.
Sorry to cut in on you, Ken. I just had an alert that he had some information on that being illegal already, so. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion, concerns for Ken?
Ms. Chairwoman, the Rules Committee met, and considering the public comments and recommendation department staff, the Rules Committee recommends approval of the fish rules as proposed, and I so move.
Second.
Can we, any discussion? We'll do a roll call.
Commissioner Barwick?
Aye.
Commissioner Mabry?
Aye.
Commissioner Holder?
Aye.
Commissioner Zelps? Commissioner Dillingham? Commissioner Kane? Commissioner Gaddis?
Aye. All right, now,
Next one.
chapter 20.
All right, so, we also had one rule change proposal related to, or that would amend, Title 800, Chapter 20, Subchapter 1, Restricted Exotic Species, and what we're asking to do is add, marbled crayfish to the list of, excluded, exotic species that can be brought into Oklahoma. So this marbled crayfish is, it's been found in some of the surrounding states. They're all females, and their eggs are all females, and I don't know how that works biologically. But anyway, so
I want to know.
Need to know.
yeah, right.
I'm a biologist by training, and I don't get it.
It just didn't make a lot of sense.
It
But
doesn't.
there's not native populations of this crayfish in the wild, so it's some sort of genetic mutation. But anyway, you only need one of these to establish a population, so you don't need a male and a female, you just need one crayfish, and so they're particularly, we don't want them here, so we want to add that to the list of species.
So find something else for your crawfish boil, is that what we're saying?
So again, it's staff's recommendation that this rule be adopted.
And the Rules Committee recommends approval of that.
Okay, can you make the motion?
I'll make the motion.
And we have a second? Any discussion?
Commissioner Barwick?
Aye.
Commissioner Mabry? Commissioner Holder? Commissioner Zelps? Commissioner Dillingham? Commissioner Kane? Commissioner Gaddis?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. And next, Bill Dinkins will discuss some wildlife rule changes.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairwoman Gaddis, Commissioners. Wildlife Division, we had roughly 20 proposals on the table. The summary there at the end on the agenda, kind of like Ken did, I'm going to just run through some of these and then we'll circle back to some more that probably need a little more discussion. You know, the first couple were just Corps of Engineer requests for some controlled hunt dates, adding some smaller non-licensed properties to Title 800 so that we could allow use of those areas and law enforcement could enforce the rules as needed. A lot of these turkey changes were basically a reflection of the resolution that y'all passed last year. We had to update Title 800 for the bag limit changes that you made. Tom only in the fall, for example, one bird limit, season dates. So that was a bunch of those that you saw. Fur bearers was in emergency status that y'all approved back in June, if y'all remember that. So this was just to making those fur bearer rules permanent. So no changes there other than just to make them permanent. Let's see, I'm going to skip over the quail for right now. So Part 19, that long list of WMAs is also a reflection of those changes for turkey season. A lot of these WMAs had the toms or either sex limit in there, so we had to go in and strike out either sex for all those. Part 25 was just our OLAP program to mirror, again, the turkey season change, extending it through May 16th. And then the subchapter 9 was reducing the controlled hunt, private lands controlled hunts from 1,000 acre to 320 acre minimum to try to reach a few more people looking to harvest some antlerless deer on their properties. We did get a lot of comments for and against, and as y'all read, the quail proposal, by far, we received the most comments on, so I appreciate the public chiming in on that. To that end, with your permission, Chairman Gaddis, I'd like Tel Judkins, our upland game biologist, has got a small PowerPoint presentation to give us a little more intel and data that we use for proposing that rule change. So, Tel.
Thank you, Bill, and bear with us just a second as we get our presentations queued up. We had technical difficulties this morning with OMES and PowerPoint, and so we've had to kind of modify our approach from normal. But first, I want to thank you for affording me the time this morning to get up and talk with you guys. I think that communication is the key in an agency like this, and for an opportunity to be able to get up and talk is I'm grateful for it, and I'm thankful for my leadership to allow me that opportunity. I want to begin by kind of going over our justification and proposal for this quail rule change. On the screen there is taken from the proposal, cleaned up a little bit just for easier language. But by closing quail season on western wildlife management areas on January 31st, we can reduce both additive mortality, direct and indirect, and additive pressure for bobwhite quail. By allowing statewide regulations for trapping during the month of February, we can increase the use of our WMAs by a broader range of constituents. Trapping predators before nesting season should result in higher nest success in quail as well as other ground nesting species such as turkey. In this talk, I'm going to talk about a few terms that I just want to make sure everybody in the audience, everybody is aware of. One is compensatory, one is additive, and those get thrown around a lot, especially when we're talking about quail. Compensatory basically means that it has no change on the total number of birds in this instance that would die in a given year. So compensatory, like hunting, doesn't add to that. If we're talking about additive, that means that it does add or increase the mortality or lower the total number of birds at the end of the year. I would also like to note, before we get too far in the weeds here, that this proposal was reviewed and accepted and approved by every wildlife manager on those western WMAs as well as their supervisors. So this isn't just something coming out of the quail box. This is something we've tried to incorporate as many people on as possible. So to begin, we started looking at, and we look at it every year here in this room, of our statewide averages for our October roadside surveys. Now, anytime we talk about this, we also mention it's not an exact science. It's not a census, it's an index. It gives us an idea. We can really start to look at the trends over time. So if we look at this chart from 1990 to 2006, we see that really indicative boom-bust cycle that we talk about with quail quite often, where it's just kind of up and down, sporadic. It doesn't have really a good solid trend to it. However, if we look from 2006 to 2014 or 2012, that's a downward slope. Now, we had a lot of years of extreme drought in that time period, and we had a lot of other issues like expansion of eastern red cedar and those type of things across the state that could have been leading to that. And then we have what I would almost refer to as an anomaly, if we're just looking at the right side of that graph, where we had that few good years of rain that 14, 15, and 16 led to that population boom, and it quickly dropped back down in 2018, 2019, all the way to this year. A chart like this, looking at it in total, where the last decade has been below the 10-year average, except for that one anomaly I mentioned, and well below the 10-year average, or the long-term average, left me and others with a thought of, we've got to do something at this point. So let's begin to look at where our quail are harvested. This data taken from our game harvest survey shows where quail are being harvested across the state. 16 to 18% on an annual basis, this is the last 5 years of data, is harvested off of our public lands. So with that, 16 to 18% are harvested on less than 3% of the actual land. Now, I do want to note these values are the entire state, but I don't think anybody would argue that more quail probably get harvested in western Oklahoma than they do in eastern. So, and I do want to point out at this point that no one is trying to argue that hunters are causing the decline in the population. We all agree that weather and habitat loss are primary drivers, but what can we manage as wildlife managers, as biologists, as the people charged with these species? We obviously can't manage weather. I've tried. I've done the dances. It doesn't work for me. But we can manage habitat. And I would argue that a lot of our WMA managers do an outstanding job doing that. But beyond that, what can we manage? And that's hunting. And the hunting, there are variables that we can affect, especially on these wildlife management areas. For instance, we all know that prescribed fire is a great tool for managing quail, but timing is essential. If we burn through a bunch of quail nests, it might not be as beneficial as we would have hoped. Much like prescribed fire, when we harvest may have a larger impact than we previously thought. I'll get more into that here in just a couple slides. These are traffic counters from a couple of WMAs. We've got Cooper here, and those two bars designate late season. So we're the last 2 weeks of February roughly. Those bars are expanded just a little bit because those traffic counters aren't checked every day. And so that kind of shows us that we do have a spike there in that black line from the north headquarters at Cooper. Here's one for Sandy Sanders as well. A little bit busier, but there again we can see a couple of spikes in those lines in that late season time frame that may be showing that we do have an influx of hunters coming in those last 2 weeks. Outside of the just direct mortality bird in hand, we're also looking at additional impacts. These impacts would include things like crippling or wounding rates, which according to one study that was put out in one of the National Quail Symposiums in the 80s showed that up to 15 to 25% above the actual bird in hand value could result in your total bird loss by hunting. So just because you shot 7 birds and you've got them in your bag, 15 to 25% more were probably wounded by other pellets that may make them susceptible to other things like mammalian or avian predation. We're also looking at additive stress during one of the most difficult times of the year and more difficult to forage. Much of the state this last week has been blanketed with, at my house, up to 9 inches of snow in places. Makes it pretty tough for a little bird to be able to get out there and forage. Luckily, this event's going to burn off pretty quickly, but these events are becoming more and more prevalent as time goes on. It seems like February storms weren't all the norm when I was growing up, but for the last decade or so, they've definitely become a more normal thing. We're also looking at a net energy loss. So during this time of year, and I heard it this morning, that those birds hold tight in a storm like this. They don't want to get up and flush and run and get away from a predator. So if we're out there adding more stress to them during this trying time, that can become a little bit of an issue. So that energy loss from flushing, running, avoiding bird dogs and hunters definitely is a loss of calories and more food that they're going to have to forage for. During this time of year, we also have an increased susceptibility to predation. We have a higher number of avian predators this time of year just due to their normal migration patterns. And we also have a loss of visual cover because the trees don't have leaves on them. So those sandplum thickets that they love to hide in, you can still kind of see through them this time of year, making it even harder for a bird to stay alive this time of year. So in other words, we could have up to 30% more or 25% more birds crippled and not recovered due to hunting mortality, while at the same time those birds should be removed from some of those previous statistics that were showing really high mammalian and avian predation and moved into a category of hunting because that hunting made it easier for that predator to get that bird, quite possibly. And again, I'll stress that we're not saying that hunting is a driving factor here, but it's definitely a piece of the puzzle. And when we harvest, maybe having a bigger key than we thought. So I'll draw your attention to this chart. And this is taken directly from a recent publication in the Harvest of Fish and Wildlife. This chapter in this textbook was co-authored by Dr. Dwayne Elmore, who's here today. And what this chart represents is the probability that a bird survives in the breeding season. So what are the odds a bird makes it from, say, the first day of season? It's about a 20% chance that they make it to April. It's not that big. January 1st, about a 25% chance, so a slight increase. February 1st, we've gone to 40%. That's a pretty steady jump over, you know, that 20 to 25 over a month. And then by the end of the season, so February 15th, we're at roughly 50% chance that these birds are going to survive. So if you were to harvest birds on the last day of season, 1 out of every 2 of those birds would have made it to be able to breed in the following April. Now, if mortality was purely compensatory, that word I threw around earlier, then we would expect that this be kind of a steady line. It didn't have any real big inflections. But here we see that there's 2 major inflection points. One right around January 1st, which is usually when we start to see a little bit of cold weather, and right at the end of February 15th. Now, I do also want to stress that I'm not throwing this data out from a ton of different states. This is from our own research. This specifically was from Beaver River from 2013 and 2014 as part of our Quail Ecology and Management 1 project. So this is directly from the WMAs that we're discussing here. And again, since there are those inflections, it implies to me that we could be seeing some additive pressure on our birds here. So to kind of recap, we've looked at our indexes and we've seen that there might be an issue. We should probably look at doing something. We've looked at some of the data. We've looked at our use and where birds are being harvested. Another way that we've gone about this is looking at our wing box program. Since I took over as the upland game biologist, biologists across the state have increased efforts to attain better harvest data by utilizing voluntary hunter surveys and harvested quail wing collection on 10 of our WMAs across the state. In the previous 3 seasons, I don't have the numbers for this current season yet, hunters have donated 1,064 wings, completed 254 individual surveys. So our participation in these has been fairly low, but I think that's a pretty representative sample across the board. Hunters participating were from 13 states, including Oklahoma, and about 13% of the participants were non-residents. Now, I will add that the majority of these surveys were from Beaver River and Cooper. There's actually 80% of them come from those 2 WMAs alone. Definitely a lot of pressure on those 2. We do have these surveys on eastern WMAs as well. So Kaw and Pushmataha WMAs are represented in that. So we've looked internally at what's going on. Let's look externally and see if there's other things that we can look at for keys as far as what we should do. First, we wanted to look at what are other states around us doing. So these are the season openings and closings for the states around us that have bobwhite quail seasons. New Mexico has a little bit, but theirs are really focused on the other quail species there. Colorado closes January 31st, statewide. Kansas closes January 31st, statewide. Missouri, January 15th. Arkansas, February 6th. And then Texas closes February 27th, but I do want to point out that their western WMAs close January 31st due to pressure. These 2 WMAs are the kind of the pinnacle for public land quail hunting in West Texas. There's not a lot of public land there in Texas. We'll also add that there are other WMAs that have highly variable dates, like some are only open on the weekends. Some are only open 2 days here and 2 days there. So it's really kind of hard to navigate some of their seasons, and each one of them has their own justification, but across the board we can really see that January 31st is a reoccurring theme. So we've looked at other states and their seasons. Let's look at other states and their research. Maybe it's just our research that we're getting some bias from. But in one Texas study, this is a PhD dissertation, for Texas quail, they wanted to focus in on the harvest on a specific property. Rather than trying to throw out statewide regulations, they wanted to look at how can we affect the change on these properties that are being more heavily pressured than others. And so by engaging in this dialogue regarding the array of management strategies, and I'll add in including changing of season dates or when people are harvesting, we could prevent localized overharvest. One study in Kansas that they found that harvest is additive to natural mortality and suggests that local movement to maintain optimal group size can help to mask the true effect of harvest on observed densities in small areas. Another study in Illinois, and that's those last 5 bullets all come from that study, but it found that the later in the season the harvest occurs, the less opportunity for compensation and the greater the additive nature. So the later we go into the season, the more risk that we have of it being truly additive pressure. And then I'll also add that the principal approach that they found in this study has been to shorten season length by reducing late season, February specifically, hunting opportunities. And I'll also note that the February there is directly from that paper. That's not a bracket that I've added in there. Another point on the Kansas one above is that they found that a lot of their non-resident hunters were not as self-regulating as some of their resident hunters. So a resident might say, hey, it snowed this weekend, it's 6 inches of snow, I don't want to go. Non-residents, it was tough to gauge, but it looked like they were not as self-limiting because they've made the trip, they want to be able to spend the time and be able to get that hunt out. So with that, just to kind of recap the things that we looked at. First, by closing this quail season on western WMAs on January 31st, we reduced both additive mortality and additive pressure for bobwhite quail. By allowing statewide regulations for trapping during the month of February, we also can increase the use of our WMAs by a broader range of constituents. Trapping predators before nesting season should result in higher nest success in quail as well as other ground nesting species like turkey. Every successful nest translates to about 12 additional birds on the ground. So, if we've got even 10 birds on a WMA that survive, that can end up being 120 birds potentially in the season, minus the mortality throughout the regular year of predators. Again, I want to stress that this proposal has been reviewed and approved by every western WMA biologist and their supervisors. We do have a letter of support from Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever. And with that, I want to say thank you for your consideration of this proposal and allowing me the time to get up and talk about it. And I would be happy to try to answer any of your questions.
Any questions? And we have one signed up to speak, and that's Dr. Elmore, so we'll make sure we get to that. If there any we missed?
Before we get into it, do we have a survey of our non-residents out on these western wildlife management areas?
I wish that I could tell you yes. And that's something I've really tried to get at with these last few years with our Wingbox program is that voluntary effort. Some animals like deer, turkey, our big game are really easy to track that on because we can simply go to the license database and say, they've had the non-resident turkey tag, let's count those up. With our quail hunters, they only have to have the hunting license, and so that's pretty vague. And even looking at when they purchased their license can really mislead us on our thinking there. In the simplest terms, no, we don't have a true data set. Now, we do have anecdotal reports from our WMA biologists. We've got the traffic counters there, and then our game harvest survey that shows kind of a breakdown of our respondents, which if we really get too far into the weeds with our game harvest survey, the number of respondents for quail are getting lower and lower, and so that expansion factor seems to go up a little bit more on those. But no, specifically, there's not a direct answer to that.
It's been reported to us that those last 2 weeks in February are really a lot of, just anecdotally, a lot of out-of-state non-residents are hunting, just day after day after day, and sort of makes sense if right across the border they've closed theirs down.
Absolutely. And I would argue along with that we can see that with our residents as well. Again, like I said in the presentation, we're a little bit more self-limiting, but if someone wants to hunt bobwhite quail, well, right now, about the only place to go is Oklahoma. Texas is fairly cost prohibitive as well as total number of public acres available prohibitive. And so even with our residents, it can be a little bit of an issue of the number of folks getting out there or getting back out there.
And you may have noticed that we had very few non-resident comments come in on the rule proposal, but there were a couple from Colorado that talked about they specifically come here to hunt after their season closes down on January 31st. And so there is that.
So is it appropriate now for have Dr. Elmore?
Any more questions for Tell or Bill before Dr. Elmore steps up? Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tel.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
Appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'll keep this real brief. Tel hit most of the high points I think are important for y'all to consider. Just to state that my role is not to influence policy. My role is to collect data that policymakers can use to make informed decisions. There are a couple of bits of data that I have been involved with that's been mentioned here today. And I've gotten a lot of questions and comments like y'all have from hunters wanting clarity on a couple of these. So that's what I wanted to highlight today. Just a couple points of clarification to make sure, if thinking about if I was in y'all's place, what would I want to know? So one thing that Tel mentioned that I think is really important is that this harvest, or mortality rather, is not linear across the winter. There's definite inflection points that we see, and there's lots of factors that are leading to that. Hunting is in there, but also things like winter storms, raptor migrations, etc. But if I'm a manager, I'm really interested in those periods where we see big jumps in survival probability, because that means anything that's happening to that group of birds at that period is disproportionately important to how many are going to end up as potential breeding stock. So that's the first point I'd like to make. That's really what that figure says. That does not say hunting is a problem. That says you need to pay particular attention to those areas where we see those big inflection points, because something's happening there. Secondly, it's important to realize that when we're talking about harvest, there's two main things that are really relevant. Total harvest, in other words, percent of the population that might be shot, but also the when. And the when is where this figure becomes a little more relevant. But the total harvest matters in a big way. You could shoot birds in May, and it wouldn't matter if you only shot 1% of them. But you can shoot a higher percentage of birds earlier in the season with a lower probability that it will matter. And that's something to think about. Where's the distribution of hunting and harvest pressure happening? And that's really variable. It varies from WMA to WMA, and it varies from year to year. So that's a hard thing to track. If you feel like harvest is an issue, and I'm not just talking about Oklahoma, anywhere, if harvest is ever an issue for bobwhite, there's really two ways you can influence that: bag limit and season length. Now, for bobwhite, having a high bag limit and a high reproductive capacity, bag limit is not very practical. The data shows that across the U.S., most hunters are averaging less than 3 birds harvested per day. So the realized bag is much lower than the legal bag. So you would have to drop the bag limit exceptionally low before we would anticipate there being an effect. The area that you have the most control over is season length. So I just wanted to state that. And that's not just my opinion. That is straight from the Harvest Management chapter that was just published. And all the biologists that contributed to that were pretty much in agreement that that would be true for any species with a high reproductive capacity like bobwhite. Some specific data that's been used and I've gotten questions about, and you probably have too, is about the recent pack saddle beaver study that reported only 9% of the banded birds were harvested by hunters. I want to be clear that that is the reported rate of return. There is an unknown non-reporting bias. We know that not everybody calls those bands in. We don't know what that rate is, but the literature suggests it's in the range of 30%. So conservatively, I would bump that up by 30%. Furthermore, there's an unknown crippling loss rate. The literature suggests that that range is between 5 and 30%. Most biologists assume a 15% conservative crippling rate. So I would bump that number up by, again, 15%. So that 9% is a very conservative estimate of what harvest is. It's likely double that, and it could be much higher. Now that alone doesn't tell you much, because some populations could sustain very high levels of harvest. You'll see in the literature examples of 60% harvest on isolated areas with no apparent change in fall standing crop from year to year. But you've got to take landscape context into consideration. A lot of those areas were very small, they were very connected, they were open populations where there was a lot of immigration happening that would mask any potential additive harvest that might be happening. If you have a closed population, an area that doesn't have habitat around it, there's no immigration, there's no potential rescue effect, then harvest rates become more problematic. Now clearly in Oklahoma, as diverse as the state is, we have both. We have closed and open populations. So to have a statewide regulation that covers all of that is very difficult. And if you want to have simple regulations, then generally you would lean towards a more cautionary principle. Or you could have more specific regulations like we do for big game that take into account the local landscape context of specific areas. And the final thing I'd like to say is that it is possible to have additive harvest and to still have a sustainable quail population. There's two primary mechanisms that could lead to that. One is the immigration, the rescue effect that I just mentioned. The other is that you can actually see situations where harvest is resulting in a lower actual fall population than would otherwise be realized. In other words, you could have two adjacent areas, same habitat, one not hunted, one hunted heavily, and you might have a fall density on one side, let's say a bird per acre, and on the other side a bird per 3 acres. That might be acceptable, depending on the objectives, but it is possible to have high harvest and still sustained bobwhite populations. And I'd be happy to take any questions if I can.
Doctor, I have a question, a
Yes,
rhetorical question in some ways, because we're not proposing this. It's not been proposed. But if we had a statewide ban on hunting quail, would the quail population increase?
So it might increase on certain areas. I think the probability of that happening on a few small areas is high, but statewide it's not going to solve our quail problem.
Okay, thank you.
Question, if I could, on the bag limit, on the averages based on surveys being 3 harvested across our region. Is that indicative, do you believe that's indicative of the areas being hunted and the population available in those areas? In other words, if you have areas that have heavier concentration of quail that do have the capacity to harvest 10 birds in a day on a daily bag limit, do we have any data at all that really concentrates the harvest amounts in those areas that are capable of carrying that type of a bag limit?
That's an excellent question. I'm not aware of any long-term data sets that show that. Data probably exists, but I don't know of anyone that's analyzed it in a way to try to correlate bag with estimated population density. I think that would be a really interesting question. It's highly likely that it's fluctuating, mostly driven by changes in density. I know when I was hunting in 2015 and 16, I was shooting a limit most times, but it would take me 3 or 4 days in a year like this to do it probably. So it does affect
And to that
success.
point where you do have the population areas or concentration density of birds, it would seem that a bag limitation of limiting your bag might actually help those areas, or at least reduce some of the pressure in those areas. And it's really not going to negatively impact the areas that don't have that density because you can't get to it anyway. Would that be correct?
That's a possibility. Some have suggested that lowering the bag limit to a more reasonable, a more attainable level might actually increase harvest. I think that's debatable, whether that would happen. I can't say, but that has been a concern of some biologists, that if we lower the bag limit to something more attainable, then people might actually increase their effort to reach it. I think that's at least something to consider, but I don't know of any data to suggest one way or another.
Well, I really appreciate not only yours and independent, but the department's continued work and research on this. As a lifelong avid quail hunter who's been concerned about the decline for many, many years, we need to be doing something. I know there's no easy answers, there's no silver bullets, but I appreciate the data that's being shared, so thank you and the efforts.
I had a couple of questions for you.
Yes, sir.
One, back years ago, we had, our season was so many certain days of the week. Allowing those birds to recovey, I get a rest, I guess, is what we were trying to accomplish. Does that have any merit on these wildlife management areas now?
I'm glad you asked that. When we were writing that chapter on harvest, we had a long discussion about that. That is one potential way to affect harvest if you're trying to lower harvest. Most likely that would disproportionately affect non-resident hunters because it's less likely they would come here if they had to hunt on odd or even days, especially if it was a statewide. And if they could just hop from WMA to WMA, they might still come. But if you suspected that most of your pressure was coming from non-residents, that might address it. But if it's mostly resident hunters, it probably have less effect.
Okay. This year in particular, you know, we had some pretty favorable weather conditions, we thought. We did see some birds at the end of the season. We you know, in our area, in the very southwest corner, we couldn't find them here at harvest. But in this year, everybody says it's habitat and weather. What % do you put on each of those? Like this given year, was 80% of it weather and 20% habitat, or do you look at it like that?
I think it's a hierarchical decision. The habitat has to be there first, or nothing else matters. Once you've checked that box, then weather becomes the driving factor. Once you've checked that box, you can go on to the next items, which might be things like predation, both from us and from ground-based mammalian predators, reptiles, raptors, etc. I mean, everything's trying to kill quail, and it's really hard for a quail to survive. But if the habitat's not there and the weather wasn't conducive, there are no quail for the predator to take. So it's a hierarchy, I think, of decisions. And that's why habitat is always brought up first, is because so much of the landscape simply cannot support quail, period.
Okay.
And having larger areas of habitat is a good hedge against things like harvest. Because when you have large, extensive landscapes and connected populations, in other words, that open population where you have immigration, you can have a lot higher harvest levels than, let's say, a 50-acre tract that's surrounded by nothing. That population can probably handle no harvest. It's doomed one way or another.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
So, you know, we've shared these comments with staff. We've talked about it just about every week in our supervisor meetings. And, you know, Oklahoma is known to be one of the premier hunting states in the nation. And that graph that was up there, I don't know how it changed, but it just did on its own. But if we continue this downward trend, we won't be. And I think all of us realize something needs to be done. We're spending lots of money on research, and we really haven't found the silver bullet, and I don't think that we really thought we would, but we're looking at a lot, and we got more quail research coming online. So we're going to continue to look and address this, because I grew up as a quail hunter. It's the first thing my father and I ever hunted, you know, because there wasn't any deer back then or turkeys. So, you know, I'm passionate about it, and I know several people in this room are. So the recommendation is, you know, based on what we have, is to go forward with the proposal. And like I said, we will continue doing some more research on things. We'll dive into that little blip we saw in February. You know, is it non-resident, is it resident, is it both? We don't know, unfortunately. We just have a car counter with a blip, and we don't know. I mean, local observations, Russ has been texting me all morning. We asked staff this morning out on those WMAs, what are you seeing right now? And I can tell you there's several folks out there. Several non-resident folks are out there. Wade Free, probably the best quail hunter we've got on staff, hunted a public land this weekend. So it's residents and non-residents, and I wish I had a better, more absolute number of what that is. But as it stands right now, the recommendation from staff is to go forward with all of them, including the quail proposal as submitted.
Wade, well, how was the hunting? And where did you hunt? Move any coveys?
I think Laura MacGyver from Quail Forever has a report for us from this weekend as well. How was yours?
I should have carried a camera because we did flush a covey, but it wasn't shootable at all, which was fine anyway. But I do like to see more birds out there, and I have a couple of weeks ago did see 2 coveys out on the same property in a different area. So I know there are some birds there, but not like what there used to be.
Absolutely.
Come use our microphone.
We got people tuned in online, so.
If you shot enough birds, I'm pretty deaf.
Anyway, and this was probably, we've hunted pack saddle 6 times this year. We hunt Cooper, black kettle, been going to black kettle since '78. Since pack saddle open we've been. But anyway, we moved 6 coveys Saturday, had the snow. Moisture wasn't as beneficial as we hoped. You know, it stayed frozen most of the morning. Dogs still had trouble in the afternoon working singles and stuff. Wind got up. Anyway, we were there yesterday. We moved 4 coveys before the wind got up to 35 mile an hour. But I've shared with JD and some of the other guys the manager out there is doing a phenomenal job. Guys at Cooper doing a phenomenal job. We found birds at Cooper. Now, we did notice after the polar vortex last February, we were up in, hunted around that part of the northwestern part of the state. Before that, few days before that hit, I'm sure these guys will agree that, the biologists from the Dale Rollins Rolling Plains deal told us they estimated 30-35% death loss after that. But it's tough this year, and bird numbers are down, but there are birds. But I would like to say, we were at Cooper last week, never saw another group of hunters. A friend of ours was on the north side, they never saw any. We saw one group, and we knew them. They left at noon at Pack Saddle in 2 days out there this weekend. I understand they've got road counters, but we're not seeing anybody. And we've heard the deals about the out-of-staters flooding in. We're not seeing them. I just wanted to share that with you. I don't want to get in.
Thank you.
The other thing I might want to stress is that this was kind of a 2-prong for those western WMAs to close quail season at the end of January, but also open up trapping to get at some of those mammalian predators. That was the other part of the equation. I know it was presented, but I wanted to stress that also, that turkey, quail, whatever we can do to help address that issue, I think it's important.
So I might just comment, because and I'm not going to go through everything that we've gone through in our meetings with staff as I was getting feedback from constituents in District 8. To me, it's not about, we're not charged to be up here to be popular in our decisions. We're up here to be charged with making good decisions based on science. I had a lot of feedback. I think we all have in the public comments. We've had a lot of feedback on this, kind of all over the board for different reasons. I think probably the thing I'm most sensitive to is the fact that not everybody has with only 3% of our lands being public access, not everybody has access to private lands. Not everyone has the ability to pay the lease prices for private lands. And we have a large portion of our state and license holders, resident license holders, that don't have the flexibility to hunt private lands. So looking at things from a standpoint, like I said earlier, I know there's no silver bullet. I know there's no one thing or two things we could do, or we would already be trying to do it. And so we've got to start moving the needle, and I'm 100% behind trying to make decisions that are good, well-informed decisions to see if we can impact that change. To me, though, it seems like if we're going to do it, and I know this would even be less popular, we get a lot more pressure from resident and non-resident across the entire state. But if we're going to do something, if we really believe these numbers and want to test these numbers, I think we need to do it across the board. I don't think we should just do it at certain WMAs. I don't think we should necessarily do it just for in-state versus out-of-state. And for me, based on what's proposed today as it relates to the WMAs and quail season. I personally would rather see us, we have the technology today, it's not going to be expensive technology to be able to monitor really what is coming in out of state versus in state, who's accessing. It's harder to get true harvest numbers out of who's on the WMAs for sure. But then I'd really like to see us regroup, and we can still do it for this next season. We still have time for public comment and feedback, but look at a shortened season across the state. If that's really what we feel like we need to do, or if we need to look at bag limits, you know, I would be in favor of following the science on that. But as this is proposed, it's just kind of hard because it doesn't, we really don't have the numbers specific to western WMAs, which is where the density population tends to be of quail, of what impact, you know, this would really have. And so I might turn it over to Jim to talk about what the Rules Committee discussed and any recommendations or changes they might have to this, if any. But I just wanted to share, one, my appreciation for the work and research that's gone into this, and my support of trying to do something that's really going to move the needle, even if it's not popular. Because as a conservationist and as a hunter myself, the numbers don't lie, and we do have to do something, and we're going to be seeing this species on an endangered species list in Oklahoma before too long. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Chad. The Rules Committee did meet, and this is very controversial, and we spent, I think, most of our time just on this season change. That way, we recommend all the other rules, but I don't know if we want to vote on those and then separate out on the season. We did have some comments on the camping rule too, and I just might point.
Separate agenda item.
Yeah, okay. We'll stick with the season dates then. All the other rules we propose to recommend, except for that season. And some of the alternatives we kicked around was make quail hunting on WMAs a draw hunts, reduce the bag limit, limit non-resident quail hunting, take 2 weeks off the beginning of the quail season, table any changes pending more data on hunting pressure, close quail season on all of them for the whole year, all the WMAs. And this was something I think was a little bit confusing to some of the constituents. These rules only pertain to public land, not private land. And I think there were some comments that they thought it pertained to private land too. And stagger the season by days, and some days open, some days closed. I mean, that's pretty hard to implement, but I guess in the past that's the way it was done. So those things were kicked around. And what the committee recommends is approval of the rules as proposed but modified, keep the quail season dates as is for resident hunters, and close the last 2 weeks of the current season to non-residents. So non-residents would end their season on January 31st. That's what the Rules Committee recommends. And I might say that, you know, anytime we take hunting opportunity away from our hunters, we should be very careful. What if the next 2 years we get lucky and we have the best weather conditions, the best everything? Well, we've just cut off 2 seasons or 2 weeks out of the season, which I think some people think are the best part, best hunting days of the season is the last 2 weeks. So you might keep that in mind.
I would second that motion, but then would like to add another comment just for discussion on that if I could. And that is that you know, a lot of the comments I had with regards to those residents that can only hunt on public lands, and you all saw this in the public comments, there's a lot of them that are concerned. The WMAs are already limited access and closed for quail season during deer season. And really, for all practical purposes, other than getting out and exercising your dogs and trying to get the hunters and dogs in shape, the first part of season, the conditions just aren't right. It's too dry, it's too green. It's just hard to find many birds. So I think to that point, it is the latter part of the season, and it's certainly been my experience as a hunter, the latter part of the season the conditions are apt to be more right for finding birds than they are early in the season. But that doesn't mean if the science speaks to the additive measures and pressures with regards to that last 2 weeks, then to me, we've got to listen to that and test it and see some things and do it really more on a statewide basis for resident and non-resident. So I think that's where I'd really like to see our staff focus on, and even if it's for this next season, if we have time, and I think we do for this particular season, to kind of come back with any modifications if this passes as the Rules Committee recommended. If there's any additive suggestions or recommendations that we need to consider and take public comment on again before the season, I for one would welcome that. So.
Yeah, JD?
I might regret opening my mouth, but the one thing I want to make certain of and be clear of is, I hate going down a road where it looks like we're anti-non-residents, right? Because we have to recognize the fact that tourism is the third biggest industry in our state, and hunting and fishing is a big part of that. And we've got the Oklahoma Fishing Trail advertising all the states around us to come here and fish, and we don't want non-residents to get the feeling that we're closing this off because we're anti-non-residents. I think if you recall that map that Tel threw up, it sounds like it's more related to at least some uncertainty, but at least anecdotal evidence as well, that because Kansas, Colorado, West Texas, Panhandle closed down January 31st, that we want to prevent sort of an influx of those folks in our much more limited public land areas where that harvest could be more additive during the latter part of the year. So I just want to kind of throw that out there in hopes that this isn't received by any as an anti-non-resident measure as much as it is aligning our seasons with those around us as much as possible. And then I guess, just staff, I want to thank them for their hard work, working with the great researchers at Oklahoma State, collecting this data. If there's any take home at all from the presentation this morning, I hope it is something that they've been pounding in my head actually for a couple of years now as they've proposed this rule, and it's just now made it to this level. But all the quail research and wildlife management class work and field work that we did going through Oklahoma State back in the day, and that's been 30 years ago now, there was no additive nature from hunting. And I think as scientists or as a governing body managing a science-based organization, we have to always remind ourselves that science is evolving. And so just because that was the concrete answer 30 years ago doesn't mean that science says that today. And what I'm hearing from Dr. Elmore and others involved in the research is that hunters can be additive to the equation. And in this case, later in the season, the more so it is. And in this case, the more concentrated that hunting pressure is. We're not talking about spreading people out over the 97% of the landscape that's privately held. We're talking about the 3% of the landscape where people concentrate. And people that have been out there hunting and know it, Wade calls it the revolving door. One group will move through bright and early shooting hours, and then they've flushed everything and they're gone, and then another group comes in and hunts that same area again. So hopefully everybody will keep that in mind as well as we pursue and look at other opportunities. And then thirdly, I'll just say that a lot of folks tend to focus on what we've got right in front of us, which is what's happening in Oklahoma. But as a member of the National Bobwhite conservation initiative. I sit on that executive committee. All the states that have bobwhite quail, this is happening across bobwhite range, right? This precipitous decline in the population is not anything that Oklahoma has done and is screwing up. I mean, this goes from Georgia to Oklahoma. I mean, quail bobwhites have been essentially extirpated in New Jersey and some of those areas, and so it's alarming, and it is range-wide, multi-state problem. So it won't just be on us to find the silver bullet or the answers to the problem, but a lot of states banding together, and they are banding together. I know TEL sits on those technical work groups as well. So I think that's it. Be happy to yield any more questions if there are any. Thank you.
Any more questions or discussion? Any more discussion or questions? We have a motion.
And a second by Dillingham.
Okay. We roll call then.
Mr. Barwick? Mr. Mabry? Mr. Holder? Mr. Zelps? Mr. Dillingham? Mr. Kane? Mr. Gaddis?
Aye. Right, and chapter 30, Bill.
All right, thank you. So, there wasn't obviously as many proposals for chapter 30, but, you know, one of the things that we did notice in the comments was, for the camping one in particular, you know, some issues we've had on our WMAs with people, showing up and, let's just say, staying longer than they should, and staff has worked with law enforcement to try to figure out a way to address it. So the camping proposal came out of that, but one of the things that was in there was the way it was worded for, let me find the actual wording, here it is. Unattended camp items will be removed. In discussing that with law enforcement, I think they're in agreement that we can change that word from will to may be removed. Gives officers a little more discretion that they exhibit anyway, so we support that change, but other than that, the proposal's recommendation is to go forward with them as proposed.
We had one other change we talked about, and that was to add the word total after 21 before days, just to make it clearer. So those are the two changes, different than what the public saw in the proposal. Move that we approve the proposal as modified.
Mr. Barwick?
Aye.
Mr. Mabry?
Aye.
Mr. Holder? Mr. Zelps? Mr. Dillingham? Mr. Kane? Gaddis?
Aye. All right, any new business or, well, I guess the next date for the next meeting is scheduled for March 7th here in Oklahoma City unless changed between now and then, but do we have Any new business or unforeseen in the last 24 hours?
We do not.
I would like to make an announcement. If you're, well, while we're at this, Roger and I did go see Bill Brewster a couple weeks ago. We drove down and we were passing through Marietta, and just, he looks good and he sounds good, and he was out hunting ducks with Brack. So we were happy to see him feeling that good to be out hunting, and I think he's only has one more treatment after the one he's currently undergoing right now, and he'll be through, and we'll hope to see him back soon. Well, with no further business, we'll adjourn. Thank you again.
Fishing, hunting, wildlife management, resource protection, habitat conservation, public outreach, and education.
It's what we do. It's what we live for.
Simply put, conserving wildlife literally means the wise use of wildlife. And that's at the root of everything we do. Oklahoma is one of the most species-diverse states in the nation. Making sure opportunities exist for hunters, anglers, and all those who appreciate wildlife is not only our job.
It's our passion.
We are your Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation. From sunup to sundown, and sometimes all night long. The employees of our agency are relentless in their dedication to a job well done. The science behind wildlife conservation is constantly evolving, and our biologists are leading the way with groundbreaking and cutting-edge techniques that the entire scientific community benefits from. If that's not enough to make you proud, then consider this. We've been doing all this since our agency's birth in 1909, without using a dime of taxpayer money. That's because the Wildlife Department is designed as a user-pay, user-benefit agency. It's sportsmen and wildlife enthusiasts who pay the bill for wildlife conservation in Oklahoma.